The auctioneer's gavel hit the wooden podium with a crack that echoed through the dusty town square of Lyndon, Texas. And Holt Preston felt his stomach turn as the woman on the platform kept her eyes fixed on the ground while the crowd fell into an uncomfortable silence. It was June 1878, and the heat bore down on everyone gathered in the square like a physical weight. Holt had ridden into town that morning with no intention of attending what the locals called a bride auction. But his horse had thrown a shoe, and while the blacksmith worked, curiosity and a vague sense of unease had drawn him toward the commotion. Now he stood at the back of the crowd, his hat pulled low, watching something that made his jaw clench with anger and pity in equal measure. The woman stood alone on the raised platform, her dark hair pulled back in a severe bun, her dress plain and patched in several places. She was thin, almost gaunt, but there was something in the way she held herself, ramrod straight despite the obvious humiliation, that caught his attention. The auctioneer, a portly man with sweat staining his collar, cleared his throat and tried again. "Come now, gentlemen. Miss Willa Zimmerman is a hard worker, can cook and clean, and would make a fine wife for any man willing to give her a home. Do I hear a starting bid of $50? The silence stretched on. A few men in the crowd shifted uncomfortably. Some whispered to each other behind their hands. Holt caught fragments of their conversations. Heard her family died of fever last winter. Been living in that old shack by the creek. Strange woman, keeps to herself. Too skinny. Probably eats too much." The auctioneer's face reddened. $40 then. "Surely someone here could use a wife." More silence. The woman, Willa, finally lifted her head slightly, and Holt caught a glimpse of her face. She was younger than he had first thought, perhaps 22 or 23, with high cheekbones and eyes that seemed too large for her face. But it was not her appearance that made him step forward. It was the look in those eyes, a mixture of resignation and fierce pride that reminded him of a wild horse being broken. Before he could think about what he was doing, Holt raised his hand. $100. Every head in the crowd turned to look at him. The auctioneer's expression transformed from embarrassment to greedy delight. $100. We have a bid of $100 from the gentleman in the back. Do I hear 150? The crowd remained silent, but now they were staring at Holt with a mixture of curiosity and judgment. He ignored them, his eyes on the woman. She had turned to look at him too, her expression unreadable. Going once, going twice, sold to the gentleman for $100. The gavel came down again, and suddenly Holt found himself pushing through the crowd toward the platform. What had he just done? He was a drifter, a cowboy who worked whatever ranch would hire him for a season. He had $37 in his pocket and a horse with a thrown shoe. He did not have $100, and he certainly was not looking for a wife. But as he reached the platform and extended his hand to help the woman down, he knew he could not have stood by and watched her be humiliated any longer. She hesitated for a moment, studying his face, before placing her hand in his. Her fingers were calloused and cold despite the heat. "Thank you," she said quietly, and those two words, spoken with such genuine relief and gratitude, made something in his chest tighten painfully. The auctioneer appeared at his elbow, hand outstretched. "Payment, if you please, Mr. Preston, Holt Preston." He released the woman's hand and faced the auctioneer. "I need to settle some business first. Can I bring the payment to your office by sundown?" The man's expression soured. "This is highly irregular. Payment is expected immediately." "I understand that, but my funds are tied up at the bank in Fort Worth. I will need to send a telegram and have the money wired here. It will take a few hours at most." It was a lie, of course. Holt had no funds in Fort Worth or anywhere else. But he needed time to figure out what he was going to do. The auctioneer looked skeptical, but the woman, Willa, spoke up suddenly. "If Mr. Preston requires time to arrange payment, surely that is reasonable. After all, no one else made a bid at all." Her voice was stronger now, with an edge to it that made the auctioneer step back slightly. Something about her tone suggested education, refinement even, which seemed at odds with her worn appearance. "Very well," the man said grudgingly. "But I expect payment by sundown, or the arrangement is void." "Understood," Holt said. He turned to Willa. "May I speak with you privately?" She nodded, and he led her away from the dispersing crowd toward a small grove of cottonwood trees that provided shade at the edge of the square. When they were far enough away that no one could overhear, he stopped and faced her. "I apologize, Miss Zimmerman. I acted impulsively, and I have put us both in a difficult position. The truth is, I do not have $100. She looked at him for a long moment, and he expected anger or disappointment. Instead, her lips curved into the smallest of smiles. "I know. You know. Your boots are worn through at the heels. Your vest has been mended multiple times, and you mentioned a bank in Fort Worth rather than the bank right here in Lyndon. If you had significant funds anywhere, you would have mentioned the local institution to make your claim more credible." She paused. "But you bid anyway." Holt felt his face grow warm. "I could not stand by and watch what was happening to you. Why not? Everyone else did." It was a fair question, and he did not have a good answer. "It was not right." "No, it was not," she agreed. "But righteousness does not solve our current problem. The auctioneer will expect his money by sundown, which is approximately 6 hours from now. If you cannot pay, I will be placed back on the auction block, and you will likely be arrested for fraud." "I know." Holt removed his hat and ran a hand through his hair. "I will figure something out. I can pawn my horse and saddle, though that will not raise anywhere near $100. Do not be ridiculous. You need your horse." Willa was quiet for a moment, thinking. "How much money do you actually have?" $37. "And I have $8 hidden in my shoe, which brings us to 45. We need to raise 55 more in 6 hours. She said it matter-of-factly, as though this were a simple mathematical problem rather than an impossible task. "We?" Holt looked at her in surprise. "You placed a bid to help me, which means you are either remarkably foolish or genuinely kind. Either way, I will not stand by and let you be arrested for trying to do a decent thing. So yes, we will figure this out together." There was something about her confidence, her refusal to be defeated, that made Holt want to laugh despite their dire circumstances. "All right then. Do you have any ideas?" "As a matter of fact, I do." Willa glanced back toward the town square. "There is a poker game that runs every afternoon in the back room of the Silver Star Saloon. The buy-in is usually around $20, and the pot can go as high as $200. You want me to gamble our only money?" "I want us to gamble our money," she corrected. "I will be playing, not you." Holt stared at her. "You play poker?" "My father was a riverboat gambler before he settled here and tried his hand at farming. He taught me everything he knew before the fever took him." Her expression clouded briefly. "I am quite good." "Even if that is true, they will never let a woman sit at that table." "They will if I am with my husband and he permits it." She met his eyes steadily. "We need to make people believe this is a real marriage, at least until we can raise the money and go our separate ways." "Are you willing to play along?" Holt considered this. It was a wild plan, likely to fail, but it was better than anything he had come up with. "All right. But if this goes wrong, it will not," Willa said firmly. "Now we should probably make our story credible. Tell me about yourself, Mr. Preston. Where are you from?" They spent the next hour sitting in the shade of the cottonwoods, trading information about their lives. Holt learned that Willa had been educated at a finishing school in New Orleans, before her family's fortunes had declined, and they had moved to Texas. Her father had died 6 months ago, her mother 2 months after that, leaving Willa alone with debts she could not pay. The auction had been arranged by the town council as a way to settle her affairs, which really meant getting rid of a woman with no family and no means of support. Holt told her about growing up on a small ranch in Kansas, learning to ride and rope before he could read. His parents were gone too, lost to a harsh winter when he was 17. He had been drifting ever since, working where he could, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. "So we are both orphans with nothing to our names," Willa observed. "That should make our story believable at least. 2 lost souls finding each other." "Is that what we are?" Holt asked, and she looked at him with those large, solemn eyes. "I suppose we are whatever we need to be to survive." They walked back into town together, and Holt was acutely aware of the stares that followed them. News of his purchase had already spread, as news always did in small towns. They stopped at the general store first, where Holt bought a simple gold ring for $2, which left them with $43 between them. "We will get married properly later," he said as he slipped the ring onto her finger outside the store. "If we make it through this." "When we make it through this," Willa corrected, looking down at the ring. Her hand trembled slightly, the first sign of fear she had shown. The Silver Star Saloon was busy even in the early afternoon, full of ranch hands and drifters looking to escape the heat. The bartender, a grizzled man with one cloudy eye, looked up when they entered. "We do not serve women in here," he said flatly. "She is with me," Holt replied, keeping his voice calm but firm. "My wife. We are looking for the afternoon game." The bartender's good eye flicked between them, assessing. "Your wife plays poker." "She does." "Never heard of such a thing." But he jerked his thumb toward a door at the back of the saloon. "Game is starting in about 10 minutes. Buy-in is $20. But I am warning you now, if there is any trouble." "There will not be," Willa said quietly. "I am simply here to play cards." They made their way to the back room, where 4 men were already seated around a table covered in green felt. Smoke from cigars and cigarettes hung in the air, and the room smelled of whiskey and sweat. The men looked up when Holt and Willa entered, their expressions ranging from surprise to amusement. "Well, this is a first," one man said, a heavy-set fellow with a thick beard. "You lost your way, madam." "The church social is down the street." "I am here to play," Willa said simply. Another man, younger with slicked-back hair, laughed. "Lady, this is not a game for you. Why do not you run along and let the men play?" "I have $20 that says I can hold my own at this table," Willa replied, her voice never rising above a conversational tone. "If that is not sufficient, I understand." The men exchanged glances. The heavy-set man shrugged. "Your money is as good as anyone's, I suppose. Take a seat." Holt pulled out a chair for Willa, then positioned himself slightly behind her, arms crossed. He had played enough poker himself to follow the game, but he could tell within the first few hands that Willa had not been exaggerating about her skill. She played conservatively at first, folding more than she bet, watching the other players carefully. The men at the table clearly expected her to be an easy mark, and that worked in her favor. They bet carelessly when she stayed in a hand, convinced that a woman could not possibly understand the game. But Willa understood it perfectly. She knew when to fold, when to call, and when to raise. More importantly, she knew how to read the other players, picking up on the small tells that gave away their hands. An hour into the game, she was up $30. 2 hours in, she had doubled her original stake. The men at the table were no longer laughing. They were sweating, leaning forward intently, trying to figure out how this quiet woman in her patched dress was consistently beating them. "You are cheating," the young man with slicked-back hair finally accused, slamming his cards down on the table. "I am not," Willa said calmly. "I am simply playing better than you are. No woman plays poker like this. You have to be cheating." Holt tensed, ready to defend her, but Willa held up one hand slightly, a subtle gesture asking him to wait. "If you would like to examine the cards, you are welcome to," she said to the accuser. "You will find them unmarked and in proper order. If you would like to search me for hidden cards or devices, you may do so, though I would prefer another woman conduct the search for propriety's sake." She paused. "Or you could simply accept that I learned to play from one of the best gamblers on the Mississippi River, and I have spent years perfecting my skill." The heavyset man chuckled. "She has got you there, Danny. I saw a woman outshoot every man in a county competition once." "No reason a woman cannot be good at cards, too." Danny glared at him but sat back down, mollified but still resentful. The game continued. Willa won some hands and lost others, but she was always calculating, always watching her overall take. By the time the afternoon shadows were growing long outside, she had $98 in front of her. "I am folding out," she announced, pushing back from the table. "Thank you, gentlemen, for an entertaining afternoon." "You are leaving now?" the heavyset man asked. "Just when it was getting interesting. I have other commitments," Willa said, gathering her winnings. "Perhaps another time." They left the saloon together, and once they were outside, Holt let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. "That was incredible. How did you do that?" "Mathematics and observation," Willa replied, but there was a hint of pride in her voice. "And a bit of luck. We now have $123, which is more than enough to pay the auctioneer and have some left over." They made their way to the auctioneer's office, just as the sun was touching the horizon. The man looked surprised to see them, but accepted the $100 with barely concealed disappointment. Holt suspected he had been hoping they would fail so he could put Willa back on the auction block and collect another fee. "The marriage must be registered with the town clerk," the auctioneer said, counting the money a second time. "And consummated within 7 days, or the arrangement can be annulled." Holt felt his face heat up, but Willa just nodded calmly. "We understand." They left the office as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Holt realized he had nowhere to take his new wife. He had been sleeping in the livery stable, paying a few cents a night for a pile of hay in an empty stall. "I have a cabin," Willa said, as though reading his thoughts. "Well, calling it a cabin is generous. It is really just a shack by the creek. But it has a roof and walls, and it is ours if you want it." "Lead the way," Holt said. They walked through town and out the other side, following a narrow path that wound through scrub brush and mesquite trees. The cabin, when they reached it, was indeed more of a shack. It had probably been built by a prospector decades ago and abandoned when the easy gold ran out. But it was standing, and as Willa had promised, it had a roof and walls. Inside, there was a single room with a stone fireplace at one end, a narrow bed in the corner, and a rough wooden table with 2 chairs. A few personal items were scattered about, evidence of Willa's recent occupancy. It was not much, but after months of sleeping in stables and under stars, Holt thought it looked almost inviting. "You can have the bed," Willa said, setting the remaining money on the table. "I will sleep by the fire." "Absolutely not. You take the bed, I will be fine on the floor." "Do not be ridiculous. You are larger and need more space to be comfortable. And you are my wife, at least on paper, which means I am not going to let you sleep on the floor." They stared at each other for a moment, and then Willa laughed. It was the first time Holt had heard her laugh, and the sound was surprisingly warm and genuine. "We are arguing about who gets to sleep on the floor. This is absurd." Holt found himself smiling. It is rather ridiculous, is it not? The bed is narrow but large enough for two if we are careful, Willa said. We could share it with a blanket rolled up between us for propriety, or we could continue this argument until dawn. Your choice. It was the practical solution, and they were both practical people. All right. But I will sleep fully clothed. As will I. Willa set about building a fire while Holt went back to town to collect his horse and few belongings from the livery. By the time he returned, she had a small pot of stew heating over the fire, made from potatoes, wild onions, and a bit of salt pork. They ate in companionable silence, both exhausted from the day's events. When they finally lay down in the narrow bed with a rolled blanket between them, Holt was acutely aware of how close she was. He could hear her breathing, feel the warmth of her body even through the layers of fabric and blankets separating them. "Mr. Preston," she said softly into the darkness. "Holt. You should call me Holt." "Holt, then. I wanted to say thank you again. What you did today was either very brave or very foolish, but either way, you saved me from a terrible fate." "What will you do now?" Holt asked. "I mean after. We are married on paper, but that does not mean you are stuck with me. Once enough time has passed, you could get an annulment or a divorce." There was a long pause. "I suppose I had not thought that far ahead. I have been so focused on surviving each day that the future seemed like an impossible luxury." She shifted slightly. "What about you? What will you do?" "I need to find work. There are ranches around here that might be hiring. The Walking W Ranch is about 15 miles north of here. They are always looking for hands, especially during roundup season. The pay is decent, and the foreman is fair. You seem to know a lot about it." "I know a lot about everything in this area. When you are poor and female in a town like this, you learn to pay attention. Information can be as valuable as money sometimes." Holt thought about that. "I suppose that makes sense. I will ride out there tomorrow and see about work." "We should ride out together," Willa said. "If we are supposed to be a married couple, it will look strange if I stay here alone all day. You do not have to do that." "I know I do not have to, but it makes sense. Besides, I could look for work too. The ranch might need someone for the kitchen or laundry." They fell silent after that, and Holt listened to the crackle of the dying fire and the distant call of a coyote. He had woken up that morning a solitary drifter with no ties to anyone or anything. Now he was lying next to a woman he had bought at an auction, planning a future that included her, at least temporarily. It was strange how quickly life could change. The next morning, they rose early and rode out together, Willa sitting behind Holt on his horse since she had no mount of her own. The Walking W Ranch was sprawling and prosperous, with a large main house, numerous outbuildings, and vast stretches of grazing land dotted with cattle. The foreman, a weathered man named Dutch Kowalski, looked them over critically when they presented themselves at the main house. "I can always use another hand who knows how to work cattle," he said to Holt. "Pay is $30 a month plus meals and a place in the bunkhouse. You start at dawn and work until the work is done. No drinking on the job, no fighting with other hands, and no stealing. Break those rules and you are gone immediately." "Understood?" "Yes, sir," Holt said. Dutch turned to Willa. "As for you, Mrs. Preston, I will speak with the missus about work in the house. She has been complaining about needing help with the cooking and mending." Mrs. Walker, the ranch owner's wife, was a formidable woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She looked Willa up and down, taking in the worn dress and thin frame. "You look half-starved, girl. Can you cook for 30 men 3 times a day?" "I can," Willa said. "Can you bake bread, do laundry, mend clothes?" "Yes, madam." $20 a month plus meals. You will work from 4 in the morning until the evening dishes are done. The work is hard, and I will not tolerate laziness or complaints." "You will find me neither lazy nor prone to complaints," Willa replied. They were both hired on the spot. The Walkers provided them with a small cabin on the ranch property, not much larger than the shack by the creek, but in better repair. It had a real bed frame, a wood stove, and even a rocking chair by the window. "This is better than I have lived in years," Willa admitted, looking around the cabin with something like wonder. "We earned it," Holt said. "Well, you earned most of it with that poker game." She smiled at him, and he noticed how the expression transformed her face, softening the sharp angles and making her look younger, less careworn. "We make a good team, apparently." Over the following weeks, they fell into a routine. Holt worked from dawn until dusk, riding fence lines, herding cattle, and doing the 100 other tasks required on a working ranch. Willa was up even earlier, preparing breakfast for the ranch hands and the Walker family. She baked bread, stirred enormous pots of stew, and scrubbed clothes until her hands were raw. It was exhausting work for both of them, but it was honest work, and for the first time in longer than Holt could remember, he felt like he was building towards something rather than just drifting. They saw each other in the evenings, both too tired to do much more than eat a simple supper and fall into bed. They still maintained the rolled blanket between them, though over time it seemed to migrate toward the foot of the bed, neither of them quite acknowledging its movement. One evening, about 6 weeks after they had arrived at the ranch, Holt returned to the cabin to find Willa sitting in the rocking chair by the window, crying. She tried to hide it when he entered, wiping quickly at her face, but he had already seen. "What is wrong?" he asked, kneeling beside the chair. "Nothing, I am fine." "You are clearly not fine. Did something happen? Did someone hurt you?" "No, nothing like that." She took a shaky breath. "I am sorry, this is foolish, I am just tired." Holt did not believe that was all it was, but he did not push. Instead, he went to the stove and made tea, something he had learned she liked in the evenings. He handed her a cup and sat down on the floor beside the rocking chair. "You do not have to tell me if you do not want to," he said quietly, "but I am here if you need to talk." Willa was silent for a long time, sipping her tea and staring out the window at the darkening sky. Finally, she spoke. "Today is my birthday. I am 24 years old." She laughed, but it was a bitter sound. "Last year on my birthday, my parents were still alive. We did not have much, but my mother made me a cake with the last of our sugar, and my father gave me a book he had been saving for. It was not much, but it was something. This year, I spent my birthday stirring a pot of beans for 30 ranch hands, and no one even knows. No one cares." Holt felt something twist in his chest. "I care." She looked down at him, surprised. "You do?" "Of course I do. I am sorry I did not know. If I had, I would have done something special. We barely know each other, Holt. We have been married for 6 weeks, and I could not even tell you what your favorite food is or what you like to do when you are not working. This whole arrangement is so strange." "My favorite food is apple pie," Holt said. "And when I am not working, I like to read, though I have not had a book in my hands in months. I also like to watch the stars at night and try to pick out the constellations my father taught me when I was young." Willa wiped at her eyes again, a real smile forming on her lips. "I like to read too. And I play piano, or I used to before we had to sell ours. I miss music more than almost anything." "What is your favorite season?" "Autumn. I love the way the air smells when the leaves are falling." "What is yours?" "Spring. I like watching everything come back to life after winter." They talked for hours that night, long after the tea had gone cold and the darkness had fully descended. They shared stories from their childhoods, talked about books they had read and places they wanted to see. Holt learned that Willa had always wanted to visit San Francisco and see the ocean. Willa learned that Holt had always dreamed of owning a small ranch of his own, with enough land to raise horses. At some point, Holt moved from the floor to sit on the arm of the rocking chair, and then somehow they were both on the chair, cramped but comfortable, Willa leaning against his chest while he absently played with a loose strand of her hair. "I am glad you bit on me that day," Willa said softly. "Even though it was foolish and impulsive and could have ended terribly." "I am glad too," Holt replied, and he realized he meant it completely. Something shifted between them that night. The rolled blanket disappeared from the bed entirely, and they began sleeping with her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist. They were still not intimate in the way that married couples typically were, but there was a growing closeness, a comfort in each other's presence that had not been there before. The other ranch hands noticed, of course. They teased Holt good-naturedly about being a newlywed, about how his wife had him wrapped around her finger. Holt took the ribbing with good humor, but inside, he was starting to realize that what had begun as a lie to save Willa from humiliation was becoming something real. He was falling in love with his wife. The realization hit him one morning as he was saddling his horse. Willa had brought him breakfast, wrapped in cloth to keep it warm, and when she handed it to him, their fingers had touched. It was such a small thing, barely worth noticing, but the touch sent electricity through him. He found himself watching her walk back toward the kitchen, admiring the way she moved, the determination in her stride, the strength in her shoulders. He wanted to tell her how he felt, but fear held him back. What if she did not feel the same way? What if she still saw this as a temporary arrangement, a marriage of convenience that would eventually end? He could not bear the thought of losing her, so he kept his feelings to himself and tried to be content with what they had. Autumn came, bringing cooler temperatures and the roundup. Holt worked from before dawn until well after dark, helping to gather the cattle and drive them to market. It was brutal, exhausting work, but the ranch was doing well, and Dutch hinted that there might be bonuses for the hands at the end of the season. One evening, Holt returned to the cabin later than usual, covered in dust and aching in every muscle. Willa had left supper warming on the stove, and there was a note saying she had gone to help Mrs. Walker with something at the main house. He washed up and ate, then stretched out on the bed to rest his eyes for just a moment. He must have fallen asleep because the next thing he knew, he was being shaken awake by rough hands. "Get up," a voice growled. "You are coming with us." Holt jerked fully awake to find 3 men in the cabin, their faces covered with bandanas. Before he could react, they grabbed him and hauled him out of bed. He fought, landing a solid punch on one man's jaw, but another hit him hard on the back of the head with something solid, and stars exploded across his vision. They dragged him outside and threw him onto a horse, binding his hands to the saddle horn. Through the ringing in his ears, Holt tried to understand what was happening. Were they rustlers? Raiders? Nothing made sense. They rode for what felt like hours but was probably less than one. When they finally stopped, Holt was dragged off the horse and thrown to the ground in front of a campfire. A man stepped into the light, and Holt recognized him with a sinking feeling. It was Danny, the young man with slicked-back hair from the poker game in Lyndon. "Remember me, Preston?" Danny asked, his voice full of venom. "You and that wife of yours cheated me out of nearly $200. I have been looking for you ever since." "We did not cheat you. Willa won those hands fair and square." "That is not how I see it, and now you are going to pay me back with interest." Danny pulled out a knife, letting the firelight glint off the blade. "Let us see how pretty your wife thinks you are after I am done with you." Holt's heart raced. He struggled against the ropes binding his wrists, but they were tied too tightly. One of the other men kicked him in the ribs, and pain exploded through his side. "Leave him alone." The voice rang out across the clearing, and everyone froze. Willa stepped into the firelight, and Holt's heart stopped. She was holding a rifle, the stock pressed firmly against her shoulder, the barrel pointed directly at Danny. "Let my husband go, or I swear I will shoot you where you stand," she said, her voice deadly calm. Danny laughed, but it sounded nervous. "You will not shoot me. Women do not do things like that. I grew up hunting for our supper when my father was too drunk to do it himself," Willa replied. "I can hit a rabbit at 100 yards. At this distance, I could put a bullet through your eye without even trying hard. Now let him go." "There are 3 of us and 1 of you," Danny pointed out, though he had not moved. "True. But I will kill you first, Danny, I promise you that. Your friends can shoot me after, but you will already be dead. Is $200 worth your life?" The standoff stretched on, tension crackling in the air like lightning. Finally, one of the other men, the one Holt had punched, stepped back. "This is not worth it, Danny. Let him go." "She is bluffing," Danny said, but his voice wavered. Willa pulled the trigger. The shot rang out, and the ground erupted in a spray of dirt inches from Danny's foot. Before anyone could react, she had already worked the lever action and had another round chambered, the rifle once again pointed at Danny's chest. That was a warning. The next one will not be. Danny's face had gone pale. "Cut him loose," he said to his men. They freed Holt's hands, and he scrambled to his feet, moving quickly to Willa's side. She did not lower the rifle until they had backed away into the darkness, and even then she kept it ready as they made their way back toward the ranch. "How did you find me?" Holt asked when they were safely away. "I came back to the cabin and found it ransacked. I knew something was wrong. One of the ranch hands saw men riding east with someone tied to a horse, so I followed." She finally lowered the rifle, and he saw that her hands were shaking. "I have never been so frightened in my life." Holt stopped and pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. "You saved my life. You are the bravest woman I have ever met." "I could not lose you," she said, her voice muffled against his chest. "I cannot lose you, Holt." He pulled back just enough to look at her face, illuminated by moonlight. "Willa, I need to tell you something. These past few months, getting to know you, building a life with you, it has been the happiest time of my life. I know this started as a business arrangement, but somewhere along the way, it became real for me. I love you." Her eyes widened, and for a terrifying moment he thought he had ruined everything. But then she smiled, and it was like the sun breaking through clouds. "I love you too," she said. "I think I have loved you since the moment you bit on me, even though I did not know it at the time. You saw me when everyone else looked away. You gave me back my dignity, my hope. How could I not love you?" Holt kissed her then, really kissed her for the first time. It was clumsy and desperate and perfect, full of all the emotion they had been holding back for months. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "I want this to be a real marriage," he said. "Not just on paper. I want to build a real life with you, have a home, maybe children someday. I want everything with you, Willa." "Yes," she whispered. "Yes to all of it." They walked back to the cabin hand in hand, and that night they made their marriage real in every sense of the word. It was tender and awkward and wonderful, 2 people who had been strangers learning how to love each other. The next morning, Holt reported what had happened to Dutch, who immediately sent men into town to report Danny and his companions to the sheriff. The men were arrested 3 days later trying to rob a stagecoach, and they ended up in prison, no longer a threat to anyone. Life on the ranch continued, but everything felt different now. Holt and Willa were no longer 2 people pretending to be married. They were a real couple, building a real future together. They saved every penny they could, dreaming of the day when they might have enough to buy a small piece of land of their own. Winter came, cold and harsh, but their cabin was warm and full of love. Willa taught Holt to cook more than just basic trail food, and he taught her to ride a horse properly, something she had never learned despite living in Texas. They read together in the evenings, often from the same book, their heads bent close together by lamplight. In the spring, Dutch approached Holt with an offer. The Walkers want to sell off 100 acres on the eastern edge of the property. It is good land, has a creek running through it, and plenty of grass for cattle or horses. They are asking $200. I know that is a lot of money, but I wanted you to know about it before they advertise it more widely. $200. Holt and Willa had saved nearly $130 over the past year. It was so close, but not quite enough. He told Willa about the offer that evening, and he saw the same hope and disappointment war on her face that he felt in his chest. "We are so close," she said. "Maybe we could ask for a loan or negotiate a payment plan." "Maybe," Holt agreed, though he knew it was unlikely. The Walkers were fair, but they were also business people. They would want their money up front. The next day, Willa disappeared into town for several hours. When she returned, she had a strange look on her face, something between nervousness and excitement. "I did something," she said. "And I hope you will not be angry." "What did you do?" "I went to the Silver Star and played in the afternoon poker game again. I took $50 of our savings." She held up her hand before he could protest. "I knew it was risky, but we are so close to having our own land, Holt. I could not stand by and do nothing, and I won. I won $220. Holt stared at her, his emotions whirling. He should be angry that she had risked their savings without telling him, but he could not be. She had done it for them, for their future. "That means we have enough," he said slowly. "We can buy the land." "We can buy the land," she confirmed, and then they were both laughing and crying at the same time, holding each other in the middle of the cabin. They purchased the 100 acres the following week. The Walkers were pleased to have the land go to people they knew and trusted, and they even threw in a dozen head of cattle as a wedding present, since they had missed the actual wedding a year ago. Holt and Willa spent their first night on their own land sleeping under the stars, too excited to wait for a proper cabin to be built. They lay on a blanket by the creek, watching the stars wheel overhead, making plans for their future. "We will build a house right here," Holt said, pointing. "With a big porch so we can sit outside in the evenings, and a barn over there for the horses I want to raise. And a garden," Willa added. "A real garden with vegetables and flowers. I want flowers, Holt. I want to plant roses by the front door." "Then you will have roses," he promised. They built their house over that summer, with help from the hands at the Walking W. It was not large, just 4 rooms, but it was solid and well made, with that big porch Holt had wanted and a stone fireplace for winter. Willa planted her garden, and by autumn, they had fresh vegetables on their table every night. In November, Willa told Holt she was pregnant. He picked her up and spun her around, both of them laughing, before he remembered he should probably be gentle with her and set her carefully back down. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," she said, amused. "I know, but I want to take care of you. I want to make sure you have everything you need." "I have everything I need right here," she said, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. "I have you, I have our home, and soon we will have our child. I could not ask for anything more." Their son was born the following summer, a healthy boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's large eyes. They named him Henry, after Holt's father. Holt held his son for the first time and felt tears streaming down his face, overwhelmed by the perfection of this tiny human they had created. "He is beautiful," Willa said from the bed, exhausted but glowing. "He looks like you." "He is perfect because he is half you," Holt replied, bringing the baby to her so she could hold him. Life was not always easy. The ranch demanded constant work, and there were bad years when the cattle got sick or the creek ran dry. But they faced every challenge together, and their love only grew stronger with time. 3 years after Henry was born, they had a daughter, Grace, with her mother's quick mind and her father's quiet strength. 2 years after that came another son, Thomas, who from the moment he could walk was always getting into mischief. Holt expanded the horse breeding operation, and Willa kept the books, her mathematical mind keeping track of every penny earned and spent. They prospered slowly but steadily, adding more land when they could, improving their herd, building their reputation for breeding quality horses. On their 10th anniversary, Holt took Willa back to Lyndon, to the very spot where the auction had taken place. The town had changed, grown larger and more prosperous. The place where the auction platform had stood was now a small park with benches and trees. "I was terrified that day," Willa admitted, sitting on one of the benches. "I thought my life was over, that I would end up married to some cruel man who would see me as nothing more than property. Instead, you ended up with a broke cowboy who dragged you into a poker game to avoid arrest," Holt said with a smile. "Instead, I ended up with the love of my life," she corrected. "The man who saw me when I was invisible to everyone else. The man who has given me everything I ever dreamed of and more." Holt took her hand, the gold ring he had bought for $2 10 years ago still on her finger, now supplemented by a nicer ring he had given her on their 5th anniversary. "You gave me just as much, Willa. Before I met you, I was drifting, going nowhere. You gave me purpose, a reason to build something lasting. You gave me a home, a family, a future. Everything good in my life comes from that moment when I was foolish enough to bid on a woman I could not afford." "The best kind of foolishness," Willa said, leaning her head on his shoulder. They sat there for a long time, watching people go about their business in the town square, remembering how far they had come. Then they rode home together, back to their ranch, their children, their life. Years continued to pass. Henry grew into a serious young man who loved working with the horses as much as his father did. Grace surprised everyone by becoming interested in medicine after helping nurse a sick calf back to health, and eventually went to study with a doctor in San Antonio. Thomas, true to form, announced at age 16 that he wanted to be a Texas Ranger and set off to make his fortune enforcing the law. Holt and Willa watched their children grow and leave, proud but a little sad to see them go. But they still had each other, and after 30 years of marriage, they were still as in love as they had been that night when Willa had saved Holt from Danny and his men. On their 40th anniversary, their children returned home with spouses and grandchildren in tow. The small ranch house that had once seemed so spacious was packed to bursting with family, with noise and laughter and love. After the big anniversary dinner, after the children had herded the grandchildren off to bed, Holt and Willa sat on their porch in the rocking chairs they had bought years ago, watching the sun set over their land. "You ever regret it?" Holt asked. "The way we started? I never gave you a proper courtship, a real choice in the matter." Willa reached over and took his hand, their fingers intertwining automatically after 4 decades of practice. "I have never regretted a single moment," she said firmly. "Yes, our beginning was unusual, even traumatic in some ways. But you gave me a choice every single day after that. You could have demanded your rights as a husband, could have treated me as property the way the law would have allowed. Instead, you treated me as an equal, as a partner. You let me be myself, encouraged me to be strong, valued my mind and my opinions. How could I regret any of that? I always felt like I was the lucky one," Holt admitted. "You were so far beyond what I deserved. Smart, brave, beautiful. I spent the first year of our marriage waiting for you to realize you had made a mistake. The only mistake would have been letting you go, Willa said. You are the best man I have ever known, Holt Preston. You have been a wonderful husband, an amazing father, and I thank God every day that you were foolish enough to bid on me when no one else would. They sat in comfortable silence as the last light faded from the sky, and the stars began to appear. Holt thought about that hot day in June of 1878, when he had been a rootless cowboy with $37 in his pocket and no plans beyond the next town. He thought about the woman on the auction platform, proud and terrified and alone. He thought about the impulsive decision that had changed both their lives forever. I would do it again, he said quietly. If I could go back to that day, knowing nothing about how it would turn out, I would still bid on you. I would always choose you, Willa. She squeezed his hand, and in the darkness, he saw the glint of tears on her cheeks. And I would always choose you. Inside the house, they could hear their family settling in for the night, their children talking in low voices, grandchildren laughing, the sounds of a life well lived, of love multiplied and shared. This was their legacy, Holt thought, not the land or the horses or the money they had saved. Their real legacy was this family, built on a foundation of two people who had found each other in the most unlikely way and chosen to build something beautiful together. As they rose to go inside, Holt pulled Willa close and kissed her forehead. I love you. I have loved you for 40 years, and I will love you for 40 more if we are blessed with that much time. I love you too, Willa whispered back, always and forever. They went inside together, closing the door on another day, another year, another decade of their life together. And in the morning, they would wake up side by side as they had for 40 years, ready to face whatever came next together. The ranch continued to prosper under their care and eventually under Henry's management, when Holt and Willa grew too old to handle the daily operations. They never left their land. Never wanted to. Everything they needed was right there, in the house they had built, on the land they had bought with poker winnings and saved pennies, surrounded by the family they had created. Holt lived to be 83 years old. He died peacefully in his sleep one autumn night, with Willa lying beside him, holding his hand. She followed him 6 months later, unable or unwilling to live without the other half of her heart. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking their ranch, under a large oak tree they had planted together on their 20th anniversary. Their graves were simple, marked with matching headstones that read, Holt Preston, beloved husband and father Willa Preston, beloved wife and mother together in life. Together in eternity, their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren continued to work the ranch, keeping it in the family, honoring the legacy that had started with a desperate bid at an auction in Lyndon, Texas, in the summer of 1878. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind blew just right, ranch hands swore they could see two figures sitting on the porch of the old house, holding hands and watching the sunset, still together after all these years, still in love, still choosing each other, today and always. Their story became a legend in the area, passed down through generations. The tale of the cowboy who bought the woman no one bid on and found true love in the most unexpected place. It was a reminder that sometimes the greatest blessings come disguised as risks, that love can bloom in the harshest soil, and that the choices we make in a single moment can echo through eternity, creating ripples of joy and love that touch countless lives. And that was how a broke cowboy and a desperate woman built a dynasty, not through wealth or power, but through love, partnership, and the simple decision to keep choosing each other every single day for the rest of their lives.